you start to see like glimmers through the darkness, through the struggle, through the pain of like who they are in the Lord. You're like, oh my gosh, like there's light coming through now. And you start to see Jesus. And I think that's the gift of like this relationship we have as Christians.
Welcome to This Whole Life, a podcast for all of us seeking sanity and sanctity, and a place to find joy and meaning through the integration of faith and mental health. I'm Kenna and Millea, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm happy to bring you this podcast along with my husband, Pat Millea, a Catholic speaker, musician, and leader. We invite you to our kitchen table. Okay, not literally, but you're definitely invited into the conversations that we seem to keep having once the kids have scattered off to play and we're left doing the dishes. We're excited to share this podcast for educational purposes. It's not intended as therapy or as a substitute for mental health care. So let's get talking about this whole life.
I'm not gonna stand here with my friends down and I'm not gonna run with.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to This Whole Life. It is a glorious day in the state of Minnesota.
Beautiful.
If you ever have doubts that you would want to live here, I would say come on this day and you will know the glory of Minnesota. It's beautiful here for what? At least 3 weeks out of the year?
You stop that. It's in the eye of the beholder.
But no, we are gently moving out of summer, which is it's not oppressive like, Louisiana or Texas or something. It's not terrible heat. But now we're just coming into the absolute sweet spot of it's 58 in the morning, so a little brisk, a little nip in the air, and then 79 in the afternoon. Just glory. It's the greatest. Yeah. Sorry, maybe I'm talking too much about it. I get really excited about it. It's about to be negative 30, so I get these few days, okay? My love, how are you?
I'm good. And I'm excited because today we have Father Angelus here with us to talk about an approach to healing, what he uses with the men as in his role as the vocations director for the CFR. So thank you, Father.
Guys, it's so great to be here. Thank you.
You're
such
very
a gift.
welcome.
This has been a dream in the hopper for a long time.
Come on.
Thanks to Net Ministries for making this happen.
Yeah, such a gift.
In person, you are our first on video guest.
Hey, everybody.
And if you're listening on the podcast, you don't get the benefit of that at all. But
Our faces.
He looks really good.
Our faces.
Exactly,
he looks
right.
really good.
My graying beard. You see that? The gray is coming in.
Kenna is surrounded by gray beards right now. Yes, that's right.
Gentlemen, you look fabulous.
Gentlemen.
You look fabulous.
Oh, man. Well, this is always a funny situation, Father, because I get to introduce you to your face, but I'm actually talking to people that are not here. Exactly. So you may or may not know, Father Angelus Montgomery is a CFR. He's from Nebraska originally. He's a priest with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and he currently serves as the community's vocation director at St. Joseph Friary in Harlem, New York. We were just in New York City this summer. It's a great spot.
Next time you're there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, it's happening. Show us your favorite place to eat or something. So along with his duties in helping young men with their discernment with the CFRs, he's also involved with the community's outreach to the poor and vulnerable. You likely have encountered him as one of the co-hosts of the Poco a Poco podcast.
Such a good podcast.
Such a good podcast. It feels
don't hang up here, but
Yeah, we want you here.
this-
We want you here for
after
sure.
this.
After this episode, definitely
Check
check
him out.
out Poco a Poco. Yeah, it's
you
the
guys are too
greatest.
good.
So, Father, thanks so much for being here.
Such a gift.
You're
Thank
the best.
you. Easy.
We love to start off our episodes just checking in with a little high and a hard lately.
Yeah.
Do you mind starting us off as our welcome guest?
Absolutely. I'm grateful for that. A little self-reflection. As you said, I actually get to come to Minnesota numerous times a year to my involvement in as a chaplain for Net Ministries, which is such a gift. And so I would say currently this very moment, the high and the hard kind of go together. The high meaning is the gift. It's easy to be a priest around Net missionaries. And so the gift of being present with them, and they're in their last week of training this week. And so just the gift of loving them, being with them, and it's totally life-giving. And it's great as a chaplain too. There's no major responsibilities other than loving the missionaries.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the gift of just being with them, so I definitely think that would be my high. And also the hard, I think, comes along with, I think you recognize as a priest as well, you kind of come up against the brokenness of others, right? And so my fatherly heart often in receiving the stories of others and the hurt of others, you just kind of recognize and oftentimes feel a bit powerless. So you guys have that experience, maybe obviously in those you serve and even your kids, you're like, you want so much for people, but you kind of run up against how powerless we really are. And so I feel that often. And again, I think even the gospel today, it's a Sermon on the Mount. And the Lord's like, yeah, being poor is where I want you. You're like, oh, but it feels so awful sometimes. So I think that's hard. I think that's hard to love, want so much for the Lord to do beautiful things in someone's heart and story, but also come up against our limitations, right? So I wonder if that's the tension of a Christian, right? So this moment, this day, the gift of being with the Net Missionaries, I just feel that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, especially for someone who's so overtly committed to the vow of poverty, to know that even it's still a struggle, right? That poverty is always difficult in our humanness.
It's real. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. My love.
Yeah. So my high and hard are similar to you, Father, two sides of the same coin. And that is just independence in our children. It's the start of a new school year. And it's a time when Pat and I traditionally are very thoughtful and take a step back and look at systems and processes in our family life and kind of renew our sense of where are these kids at? What are their capabilities? And so the high is in writing new chore charts and writing up afternoon routines and just seeing the growth and that we can expect more from them than we could 365 days ago. But also with that, the hard is accepting their independence and accepting their pushback and their influence on the way they want things to work. In particular, right now, our twin 5-year-old daughters are in kindergarten, and God bless them. They must be doing such a good job listening at school because they do not listen at home. They come home, and they're like, "I am done with that game, mother." Right. Down to I don't want to wear those play shorts, and I don't want to sit in that chair for dinner, and I don't want that lunchbox. Just everything feels like a struggle and a fight and a power struggle. And so trying to, stay rooted and grounded and kind of assess in these moments of how much can I give, right? How much can I still cultivate obedience in them? And how much can I be flexible with them? And it's just such a spectrum. And I don't do well often with it. So high and hard.
Independence is a tricky beast, man.
It is. And I love our twin daughters in particular are just so there's strength in numbers, I guess. Totally. I don't know, Father, you tell us. You're a triplet.
I get it.
So there's strength in numbers. And so they just think that they are so much more capable than any of our other kids have. And it's a cross right now for me.
I literally yesterday was just thinking about as excited as I am for our oldest to start driving permit wise in a couple years. Yesterday was the first time that I had to think through oh man, she will be fighting Minneapolis traffic on the way to school. And that anxiety of I trust her, but everybody it's else. A road full of who knows what, you know what I mean? And even this morning, one of our older kids was cooking his own eggs to make breakfast this morning. That's great. Appropriate independence. And one of the 5-year-old twins was I want to make my own eggs.
And I was maybe on the weekend when mommy can supervise you.
No, well.
Someday you can cook your own breakfast, but today is not that day.
Yes.
So how can we appropriately move into independence, Oh my gosh.
And you, babe?
Thank you.
Hard?
I'll start with the hard, I think. We are in the midst of, I feel like I say this all the time, and it's going to come off as the most cliche kind of oh, woe is me type comment, because everyone is busy. And I understand that. That is the number one description of someone's life. Hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm really busy these days, right? And yet there is a version of busyness that you and I, Kenna, are in the midst of right now with kids going back to school. And for whatever reason, just this season of the year has a lot of different speaking opportunities for us, some local and some very not local. And it's all very exciting. It's all very good, but it requires a lot of planning and preparation and the kind of preparation that takes more time than just planning a meeting or giving a talk that we've done a million times before, something like that. So just the difficulty of having to constantly, feels like every 2 days, reassess what are our values and how can we best live out those values this week Like, given these things on the schedule, some might have to go, but we need to let the less important ones go, not the more important ones, you know? So just a lot of constant kind of like re-envisioning what our life is going to look like and making sure that we can stick true to what we are claiming to be during this time. So it's difficult, good, but difficult. My high lately has been, there's a content and then there's a process to it. The content is we got a new car and it works very well.
New to
and
us.
New to us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not the kind of guy who will ever own a new car. So if you think I got a 2024 like Tesla or something, you are in for disappointment. No, we got a new-ish used car, which is great. But the process is that it was just that was one of the burdens in this busy season that was weighing on me, because I had forgotten how much of a hassle it is to trade in a car and buy a new one. You have to you got to figure out how much your car is worth. And you got to go get bids and values from places, and you got to go look for the car you want, blah, blah, blah.
Got to get it inspected. You got to do this.
Seriously, right.
That.
Oh my gosh. It's just, it's genuine first world problems, but it does feel good to just have that monkey off my back, have a reliable car that can get us where we need to be, that's within our price range and budget, and it's all good. So glad to be on the other side of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And it also feels like a go-kart. So pardon my first speeding ticket.
So what's great is now we have, Father, you saw it parked outside. We have a 12-passenger van for our whole family to get anywhere. And then we have a Toyota Corolla.
So it really does
There
feel
you
like
go.
I can go 80 without even trying
It's like an elephant and a baby elephant.
Yeah,
next to each
there
other.
we are. Which one are we taking today? Which one are we taking? That's great.
Oh my gosh. Yep. Well, we are really excited, Father, for you to be with us. It's going to be a great time, great conversation. I know that when we talked to you about what kinds of things you might want to bring into this conversation, you started explaining your current passion and drive right now around the idea of stories and healing. So maybe can you give us a little background, first of all, about what got you down that road of what makes stories fascinating, what drew you into this realm in the first place?
Yeah, and it's interesting though, because sometimes speaking of obedience, I didn't join the community to be the vocation director. And so the gift of the Franciscan life and the gift of our contemplative life and our brotherhood, like all the different values, if you will, like drawing me to the life. And when I was ordained, when I was a deacon, there was this conversation with the superior, and there was this sense that to start dreaming up and start to responding to grace of hey, what's God doing? And you're and I'm struck that our superior has that sense, right? Before I give you an assignment, let's talk about what God is doing in your life.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful response rather than trying to fill a need all the time. Now there's needs we have to fill, that's for sure. But the starting place of it is the man's heart. And so I had noticed in my early religious life, the gift and privilege of walking with young men. And so as that starts to open up, you're just oh wow, this could actually be an assignment. And this could actually be a space that would open up before the Lord in obedience to be able to walk with young men. So that was 2018, and I've been in the vocation office ever since.
Wow.
And so walking with young men, receiving their stories. And, vocation work, it's not just about picking something that I want to do, but it's actually about let's take a step back and necessarily move away from well, this is what I'm good at, Father, or these are my gifts, but to really read someone's heart, if you're not in a mystical sense necessarily, but to read their story, what is God doing in your life? Mm-hmm. And as you guys know, it's not just what he's been doing in this last year, but you start to look at how he's been working and living and moving in people's lives. And so it's fun to know that when you sit with someone and receive their heart, receive their story, that God starts to reveal himself and God starts to make sense of their heart, their life, their desires, their capacities. And this is also where the challenge comes in, and where you guys do a lot of your work, that our brokenness often can be an obstacle to saying yes to God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we feel that in our own lives. And so that's why it's the vocation work is not finding where you're supposed to be a friar, or who you're supposed to marry. It's actually, I feel it's uncovering your yes that can often be buried in brokenness and hurt and pain. And so when you start to actually say, okay, let's not worry about the choice you need to make for your career or your vocation, but let's start to see what's happening in your heart and where your yes is that could have been injured or distracted along the way. So it's just been awesome. The gift, I often say to guys, you think you come and see to discern our community and to get to know us, and you do, but you often leave with a different sense of oh wow, these guys aren't recruiting me. They're trying to help me discover what God made me for.
Yeah.
which is really beautiful. And it's beautiful. And I say this, I'm quoted a lot, that we tell the guys on the Come and See is like, the good news is that we don't need you. You know, and the good news is that you don't need us to be holy as well. So if there's freedom on both sides, then we're after what God is after, rather than like, oh, we have to fill spots here and we have to do this. And so it's just awesome. And I'm humbled. And my triplet brother, Father Innocent, we live in the same house. He's the pastoral director, I'm the vocation director, which means we're forming young men together. Yeah. Which is a bit of
incredible.
A dream. Which is a bit of a like
that
crazy, the fact that we get to do that together. But just like we both kind of have discovered this gift of our fatherhood in this very particular place, to love guys in these places. Sometimes the gift is to love them into their vocation. And it's loving them in these spaces that might have obstacles to a deeper sense of who they are. So anyway, there's a little bit of to begin.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think we literally told the net missionaries that last week, that the Lord doesn't need you. Which, I mean, that what you bring up with the men in your vocations work is also just a reflection of God's stance with us. God doesn't need any of us, which makes it all the more beautiful that he chose us, that he made us intentionally. He chose each of us intentionally. And he's really given us that story, you know, whatever.
Yeah, and so take the burden off. It's not your responsibility, but to be with him, you know.
So I guess I'm hearing in that, Father, this emphasis on like taking a step back, being able to see the bigger picture, being able to maybe identify threads or themes, versus maybe being hyper focused on like the next step or the outcome or the end. Love it. Like seeing life as this, again, so cliche, like life is a journey, not a destination. But really, I hear you relieving the men in your role, but for our listeners, like relieving us of that pressure. I kind of think of it as, you know, something that I love about the Poco Poco podcast and the way I feel like I've been directed and fathered by you all. Is you are so consistent about it's not about being a saint, as in that's like the prize that we get, but it's about in this life being in relationship with the Lord. And so that feels like maybe something that is a gift of telling story. And so I'm curious, like, how do you know, I imagine many of these folks coming to you don't know even where to begin. So how do you welcome them into this idea? It's pretty foreign, I think, to the world around us and to the culture around us. How do we begin to do such a thing?
Yeah, and it's beautiful. Just recently we had 8 new guys join, so just really blessed by that in the last couple of weeks. And we were on a retreat with them, and you guys probably get this sometimes in what we do and who we work with. But when you start to talk about your story and you start to talk about brokenness and you start to talk about the reality of the redemption that the Lord wants to find and meet us in our stories, there's generally a couple of responses. One is like, I'm ready. Okay, let's do this. I want the Lord. And there's also resistance. And it's interesting. We experience resistance because sometimes we're just like, Father, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of like, just to keep going into stories, to keep going into my hurt, and can get just like daunting, you know? And so to experience that in some of the guys was really beautiful. But then there was this recognition, and my brother and I were talking about it together, that if you start with a brokenness, it can be intimidating. But to remember that, and this is something that we throw around in the Catholic world a lot, but if we're made in the image and likeness of God, our vocation and our story reveals Jesus, a unique part. Like, so your image and likeness is different than mine. And so the reality is what our story is to uncover that and give that as a gift to the world. If we could say that's vocation, how did the Lord make me? And how do I uniquely propose to the world a different part of Jesus? And so, okay, that's my vocation. When I say yes to God, that's what this is going to be, whether it's in marriage, religious life, priesthood, that's beautiful. And the work that I do kind of is a continual revelation of that. But like we said it earlier, it's like, but my brokenness and my hurt and the reality of what I face in my story can cover that over. And so maybe the light's shining through a little bit, but it's difficult. And so it's beautiful to start in this, like your vocation is this image and likeness and this invitation that God has to reveal his goodness to the world. And then you can take like, okay, let's try to see where that's been injured or where that's been confused or where that's been disordered. And you can start to open it up from there. I think that takes pressure off. You're like, oh, so it's not necessarily just all about my brokenness, but it's actually about what's been there to reveal the goodness of God.
Yeah. We were just talking maybe like a week or two ago, some of our older kids who were starting to get into just like enjoying movies, and they're reading more significant, like good literature, you know? And, I was telling them about one of the things that I love about great literature, great movies, is they all, to me, in my experience, a movie or a book, any kind of story will be great to the extent that it mirrors the story, capital T,
totally.
capital S, right?
Totally.
And the ultimate story, the story of salvation is exactly what you're talking about. Like, you don't start with the crucifixion. There is any good story, no matter what, even a secular story, there is a creation moment. There's an introduction, there's a presentation of something that is good. And then there's always a descent or a loss or a destruction or a crisis, right? Yeah. But then a terrible story ends that way. Then there's always restoration, resurrection, if you want, right? That kind of a move. And just helping our kids helping them understand why I like some of these things, because they were bringing up, our daughter was bringing up, like, I don't know, like, Les Mis and some stories like that. Like, they're so hard to hear. They're so difficult. And she was really identifying that brokenness that you're talking about, Father. And I was helping her to explain that. I was saying, like, you don't have to love Les Miserables if you don't want to. That's fine. I do. You don't have to. That's fine. But what I love about it is that there's even truth in that brokenness. Like, totally. As hard as it is to see and to come up against, when art presents it in a beautiful way, it shows me something about my life, that the difficulty of the brokenness tells me that I wasn't made for that brokenness, and that there's a purpose to it if I can invite the Lord into that space. That kind of holding our story up against God's story is just a really beautiful move, I think, for all of us to make.
There's even something that we tell the guys too, which I think you guys will love, the reality that the mission, the identity and mission that the Lord has given me is going to be exactly what the evil one attacks. And so our brokenness is often around our mission, or how God wants to reveal himself. It's like unique. It's not random, like attacks from the evil one, or random attacks of like, and so, it's just interesting. So when you see our brokenness, and you start to heal and grow, and you start to maybe like turn that stone over. And I love how you guys use the word glory a lot. That's the glory. So it doesn't, obviously when we face those things, it's difficult, but there's a taste of like, oh wow, this could be like something that the Lord is trying to heal and restore. So then I can reveal something, to know that it's all kind of together, which is kind of powerful.
Yeah. Well, so I'm curious, like, how did this way of walking with men, walking with those in formation, like, how did that, come into your life? I'm curious, like, how did you get introduced to this? I've not really heard this, honestly, in like Catholic spheres before. Yeah.
I have to say, and this, you guys will appreciate this too, just because I've been on my own journey. Yeah. So my own experience of being loved and cared for, my own experience of spiritual directors, spiritual fathers, spiritual mothers, formators who see me in this way. And you guys recognize this, the gift of our own ability to be loved and be present to others is like to help someone in their own work. It's better if you're doing your own work. Right.
Yes.
And so because then we get to share like, oh yeah, this is what's going on in me. And this is how so like, I think, and I'm happy to admit this publicly because I probably talked about this on the podcast before, but like I've been a friar since 2009. So it's been a while. But I think it was COVID 2020. So coming up on the 5th year where I think had a second conversion. And my own experience of healing, my own experience of recognizing my, so, and I've said this publicly too, because it's like my mom will listen to everything. So, hey mom.
And my dad is right there with her, by the way. Yeah.
So but like the reality was like, we had a beautiful family. My parents were wonderful. But we were the family that, it's like, okay, we're going to like, I was disappointed if I got an A-.
Yeah.
So the level of expectation, the level of performance, and we were like my siblings were all American sports players, and you start to like, so you feel this, and again, you look back with a lot of mercy, but I think I was formed in this place that I have to earn love, and I have to perform, and I have to find my place. So imagine coming into the CFRs. Not with major struggles, no major addictions, no major like, okay. But imagine just coming in another space of just like, okay, I feel like there was a bit of an orphan spirit when you have this experience of like, okay, where do I fit and how do I do this? And so trying to be good at everything and trying to excel. And then when you're naturally gifted, then the reality of like, okay, I'm just going to rely on these gifts to find my place.
Right.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until really 2020 where I found, and I had a beautiful retreat, and I start to experience these things, and then had again spiritual fathers and spiritual mothers loving me and seeing me in these places, that I started to recognize that like I wanted to open up my story to the Lord.
Yeah.
And I wanted to invite him into that.
Yeah.
And also one of the things that I love to do, and it surprises a lot of people, but like the gift of Jesus saying you love your neighbor as yourself. So as yourself means that I have a new compassion on my story.
Yeah.
I have a new compassion on the little part of me that needed something or that struggled with something or who we're trying to form. And so I have, I like to say, like the fragments have a highway now, like an opening to me as I am in the present day, where I just have a lot of mercy and a lot of compassion on those parts of me. And so I feel like that has like, I feel like people look at me like, Father, that sounds awesome, but I've never heard of that before. Now there's plenty of other people that talk about it, but some of those things started to come into place for me. And I was just like, whoa, like I felt stuff lifting off of me.
Yeah. Well, and so two things strike me as you're sharing, Father, which thank you for entrusting that to us. One is you had to make some kind of bold move to even let your story be known, even just a smidge, right? Yep. Like, and so I'm curious, as I'm listening to you and thinking about like, I'm fully aware that there is, more deeper work, more substantial work to go on in my own life and with my own story. How does one, even begin to do such a thing, to approach it? So I'm curious what you might share even practically about that for folks. Yeah. And then I'll think of the second thing I was going to say later. So
maybe every time I come to Minnesota, we'll just do this again.
Perfect.
Because this is awesome. Like we could do this all day, which is great. One of the things that's, I think it was a group of Catholics who have kind of like story groups, and they like, hey, let's share our stories together. They have this great proposal that when trauma is the significant part of traumatic things, big T, small T things in our life, is that what we experience alone. Yeah. So the often the gift of healing is where we can let trauma become redemptive suffering. Yeah. And so redemptive suffering is when someone enters it with me. And so then I'm not alone anymore. And so like one of the gifts that I think I was experiencing when someone sat with me and received my story with kindness and received my story. And again, you guys are so good at this because they didn't try to fix me. And you were telling these kinds of things, and a healing journey is generally not about resolving a whole lot. And that drives people crazy. Yeah. Because I don't want to feel this way anymore, or I don't want to act this way anymore. And so we want resolution. And that's what we were talking about before the show. It's like a pill. Like, give me a pill, I'll take it, and then I'll be healed. Yes. Unfortunately, our emotional life and our regulation and our suffering and our hurt and our pain doesn't work like that. Yeah. But it's amazing. And that's why I feel so amazing. Like, I'm so humbled to be in this place, because I'm not a certified therapist. I'm not, I didn't go to get a master's in psychology. I'm not a counselor, but I can listen to you. Yeah. And hopefully, in the tenderness of Jesus and Mary, receive your story, right? And that just empowers me for some reason. Because someone did it for me. Actually, a few different people did it for me. And I have people in my life that I still work on stories with and bringing things up with. So I think that practically is asking in prayer. If you don't feel like you have anybody in your life to receive, to bring kindness into your story, meaning just to receive your heart and receive your story. And then also is recognizing that maybe the practical reality is sometimes of this, it's hard to do alone. So I totally understand it, to acknowledge that. Yeah. But oftentimes I'll tell people in prayer, like the present day symptoms. If you ask Jesus, when I pray with people or talk to people or receive stories, we always just ask Jesus, Father, what story do you want me to write about or to tell? Like, why don't you take some time in prayer and just ask the Lord? Because what healing is taking your grenade and throwing it into your heart and seeing what happens. Right. And you're like, oh, thank God, Father. That's
right. Oh my gosh, no.
But Jesus knows, like I think you mentioned the word threads. Jesus knows the threads, and he knows what thread he's ready to pull now. So like never has that failed when we're in prayer, and it's like, okay, let's ask Jesus to reveal. And he shows. Yeah. So practically prayer, like to say, Jesus, is there a story that you want to bring up from my heart, from my life? And the thing is like, well, Father, I don't remember much from my childhood. Okay, what about a story from last week? Or what about a story from last year? Like I had this experience of struggling to find a root of something, because the root is often helpful. But a year ago there was something there. I was like, okay, Lord, I'm going to sit with you in that story and let you come into that space, which was super fruitful. So maybe it's asking Jesus to bring someone in my life that can receive my story. And again, we're not talking about, it doesn't even need to be formally, but maybe it's a friend that you can just say, hey, can we or maybe it is a spiritual director, or maybe it is a sibling, or maybe someone who has the capacity to receive you in kindness. And then ask the Lord, Lord, maybe my present day symptom of insecurity, or my present day symptom of being disconnected, or my present day symptom of anxiety or lust, or whatever it might be. Is there something you want to show me, Lord, where I hold that challenge, or I hold that pain in my life, or hold the burden there? And you start to see connections. And if he wants to reveal that, then to be able to say, okay, I can tell this story. Yeah. And someone's there to receive it with kindness.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is getting at, I think when in my reflections about the idea of investigating my story, both preparing for our conversation and just over the years and all the informal ways that I've disclose my story to folks, not even knowing that's what I was doing necessarily. Sure, the hesitation has always been, but if I pay attention to that difficult thing, it's going to explode like that hand grenade you were talking about. If I look directly at it, it's going to take over my life, right? There's that fear, sure, which is one of the things that leads to repression and closing something off and choosing to forget parts of my life because I don't want it to take over. But between the two kind of practical tips that you're giving of both speaking to the Lord in prayer and saying, Lord, I need your help in investigating this, in going into this place, because I don't feel safe here, but I trust that if you're with me, you can do something with it. But also not going in there alone. That's one of the goofy cliched quips about
dark alley.
Your mind is a dark alley. Don't go in there alone. Exactly. It's brilliant, right? But that kind of an idea, especially the more painful parts of our story, it really is risky to go in there by myself, because that's a place where I've already known pain and suffering and hardship. And there's the danger, even in therapy sessions, of being re-traumatized by experiencing something again alone, like you mentioned with trauma. Alone. So being in relationship with God, being in relationship with somebody else, which it turns out is just the structure of Christian life.
That's why it's anyway. I think we're pretty set here. We're in the confounds right? Of something that the Lord, And I would even ask the third thing then, to be in relationship with God, with someone else, and yourself. Meaning, if sometimes I tell people, if you're feeling like you're getting overwhelmed in prayer when you're thinking of something, then the only thing that it'd be helpful to do is to make an act of love and compassion for yourself there. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to go into it. But can I just say, okay, Jesus, in your name, I just want to bless myself and love myself there. And then something opens up, which is really beautiful.
Well, and even in therapy, I will, have clients who they've stumbled upon maybe uncovering a trauma that definitely happens in session, something that was repressed and hidden there. And there'll be lots of signs and symptoms that they're feeling dysregulated, feeling overwhelmed. And I'll say, let's respect the way, particularly your body, is speaking to us, and give it space. We know it's there. We're not going to forget it. And let's do some of the work around so that we can come back to it. Because what we don't want to do, right? Trauma is already a viation. Trauma is already this sense of boundaries being crossed. We don't want to do that again. We don't want to do that to ourselves. And so to, again, that self-compassion you're talking about, Father, to be able to back it up and
just to take a deep breath.
And just trust in the Lord that when it's time, you'll know. Yeah. And clients have a lot of trouble accepting that, because they're but I pay you. I came here to do the hard stuff. So I found the thing, so let's go fix it. And
you said this would get better.
Yes. And again, I'm but the process is actually more important than the content. And so the way we approach this is even more important than what's the thing we're going to talk about, or what's the thing we're going to
And it's a deeper communion than we have with ourselves and communion with others. And the fragment can be loved back into communion with myself, that the challenge, rather than we got to go figure it out and we got to, because it's whoa. It's we feel that.
Yeah. We talk about it as reintegration. How do I, in a lot of internal family systems language that we use here, that idea
I love that too. I took a class last year with that.
Oh my gosh. It's so amazing. So this idea,
right?
My
little parts are very happy right now.
Yeah, that's right. True self is partying.
Yes. And elements of ourself get exiled, and we have this reunion. We have this homecoming. I mean, when I work with clients and they do those kinds of things and they bring back that part of themselves or that period of their childhood or what have you. I think so much of the prodigal son, of this like coming home, of this this part that was gone for so long from themselves, and that absence was felt acutely. I thought of my second thing from like 10 minutes ago. So I'm going to
I know, this is the great part of this conversation. We just keep like, oh crap. Like,
we did it. Yeah. Good job.
So I really appreciate and would love to hear more, Father, about, our stories often have to do with the ways that others' woundedness and brokenness, and the world's woundedness and brokenness at large too, but particular players, right? How that impacted us and how it contributed. And I think that is something that listeners and clients, there's some fear and trepidation of like, if I do this, am I going to throw my whole family of origin under the bus? Am I going to end up like not going to Christmas for the next 10 years because I'm just filled with so much rage and hate and I don't know how to like put that in order. And so it feels like there's a both and here. And so I'm curious, like, can you speak to us about that?
It's certainly going to be a tension, right? And I think the word that comes to mind is forgiveness. Is that we learn to, first of all, have to accept what happened. And I love throwing this word in here. We have to spend time grieving what happened.
Yes.
Right. And so, the grieving is not like, okay, I had a nice cry, Father, I'm done. It's like grieving could take years. The biblical notion also of mourning, like I mourn for the loss of my innocence, or I mourn for the loss of what I experienced in my childhood. And so I love that, because that's also we can use that at the end, but like, that's also super practical. I need to accept and just feel and mourn and grieve what happened. And then I can move into, because you can't forgive without any of that. The acceptance of it and the grieving of it. It's like, because then forgiveness becomes an act of the will, which it is.
Sure.
But it also means that my heart is changed and I'm able to let go of the burden of the need to control and find justice for what happened to me. And so we often think that, well, I need to bring that about. And so when we let go, that burden's no longer to us, but it's to the Lord. Right. So forgiveness, and also this is kind of a little bit of the 12-step movement and things like that. It's reasonable sometimes to think that conversation could happen with someone else, where I can sit down and say, hey, I'm not sure aware of Mom or Dad that you know this or that you hurt me, but I just want to tell you that I forgive you. And sometimes it's not possible.
Right.
And so that's actually where it's super helpful to have someone else around helping you, because then you can be like, so do I tell them? Or so do I not? And so do I? And so that's the tension, because sometimes it's helpful to tell them, but sometimes it's like, okay, maybe they're deceased. Or also, I think they say in the 12-step movement, if it will make it worse,
right.
Then that's good discernment. But if we kind of get into this, the zeal of healing and the zeal, there could be a little bit of like, well, I'm just going to need to do what I have to do for me. And we stop thinking, like the Christian reality is also thinking of others.
Totally.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's why it's that to have a good friend, a good spiritual director, a counselor, therapist, someone that can like navigate that road with you. But that takes time. You go from accepting to acknowledging to not repress anymore to grieving to the need to forgive. And then you kind of like, work in that space. Does that get to kind of what you...
Yeah, no, it does. And it makes me think of how many folks, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So people think like, oh, I should bring others with me to therapy. Like you do systems. So I should bring the other people from my system. Like I'm going to bring my husband, I'm going to bring my mom, my daughter, what have you. And what we often find is, I usually say like, absolutely, we could consider that down the road. Let's start with just you. Like, let's just begin. Like, since you're the one who called or emailed, like, let's begin with who wants to come. And we don't even
Instead
know.
of forcing other people who don't want to be here.
We don't know if anybody else wants to join you
Under
here.
duress.
Yes. So let's start with you. And in the process of telling the story, they usually end up going, I don't know that I need to do it here, but number two, it necessarily needs to be said to them.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, can you say a bit more about like, what might be the benefit, of either, we have some exercises that we do in my office. One is called the empty chair, where we pretend as if the person is here, and you get to practice it practically if you really are preparing for the conversation. But number two, the like actually therapeutic
reality of that.
Yes.
Like that's beautiful.
That our system really does feel this release and this sense of like, I've been heard. But yeah, can you speak a little bit to, what's the importance of needing to say that, or at least simulate saying that to the person who wounded you?
Yeah. And it's also super helpful, I think you guys might find too, why it's important to start with a person, because I think as we become adults and we get more mature in the Christian life, I think there's an invitation to tell a truer story of what happened too. So sometimes I think we want to protect the people we love.
Sure.
And so this is where you're like, well, my parents are good parents. I'm like, I know they're good parents, but if you want to tell me like, if you want to tell me a little more, that's fine, you know? And it's like, it's great. Like, I love your parents. I know them, but it's okay to be like, well, actually, like maybe the hurt was more than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so the truer version gives someone's experience maybe to have more access to what they felt there, to what they carried there, to what actually happened there. So I just think that's awesome as we go on. And we the self-protection is real. So you have to have a capacity at some point to say, I'd like to tell you more.
Yeah.
I'd like to reflect on more. I do oftentimes in experiences of forgiveness where you do have, let's like in prayer, we can envision your dad here and can give you an opportunity through the Lord's grace just to tell him what you want to tell him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so impactful. And so, because the repression is so real most of the time. And because I often, when you start to do the work, you're given more words and more access to how you feel. And you like need to actually speak that out loud. And so very much so has that been a powerful thing, to give people an opportunity to, in a safe situation, to practice, but also just to let words give voice to, like, not only this is what happened, but this is how it made me feel. And this is the experience I have there, and then the good discernment is, okay, do we do anything with this? And my experience is often not.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Because then you're talking about someone else's capacity to receive it.
Yes.
Yep.
And then I go into my PR thing. You're like, because I study public relations, because then you're like, okay, well, just because their response to you has nothing to do with what you need to say.
Correct.
Right.
And
Right.
how their capacity to receive it or not, so then there's a whole nother level of
Totally.
the conversation.
Yes.
That could be genuine prudence.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Because
Yep.
you could, and it's good for you to share and acknowledge, but not to criticize and not to point out, like, no, this is kind of the gift of, like, this is how I'm feeling. And not to have a spirit of criticism or a spirit of blame, because that's not super, because that'll, cause all their stuff to come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's tricky, but that's why it's great to have people around that they can kind of help us navigate that for sure.
Well, that idea of naming it, of saying it out loud, whether the person is right in front of you or whether they've died, whether it's not possible or helpful to say it to their face, just the power of saying things out loud is so significant.
Totally.
I'll tell people all the time, both in relationship to, emotional relationships, all related to confession. Like, there's a reason the church says you have to say it out loud. By all means, like, pray an act of contrition in your bedroom. That's all good and well. That's great.
Yeah.
But for confession, you can't just think your thoughts and in the same room as a priest, because your words have power to get the poison out and to release it into a space where it can actually receive healing. That idea that, Father, you were talking about the struggle of criticizing parents. I know Kenna's talked to me just in vague terms over the years about how many clients from beautiful, faithful, loving Catholic or Christian families have such a difficult time acknowledging that their parents ever did anything wrong, because
it's hard.
It feels like a betrayal.
Yeah, it does.
It feels like if I say that my mom made a mistake, I might all of a sudden be saying that my mom is a mistake or that she's a bad mom.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden then my whole family system gets called into question.
The structure falls apart.
Right. Yeah. It just this feeling of like a house of cards, like a glass house that I have to protect. And no one, especially me, is allowed to throw a stone at the glass house. That kind of an image is really difficult for people to get through. But I think so helpful just holding the very human tension of, like, I try to be a great dad, and boy, am I a screw up sometimes. It just, like, the both and is always present for everyone. Mm-hmm. Oh.
We were just never given any permission, I think, in the culture we grew up, or like the age culture that we grew up in. We were never given any permission to feel like, hey, there's something that could be off here. And so you just kind of go with it, and then you kind of look back and powerful.
Well, and I think with that too, right? Maybe not age, culture, and I'd say maybe in today's age and culture, the skills to be able to communicate that in a way that it has the highest likelihood, right? I don't have total control over how it's received, but like a high likelihood of being received well. There's a real difference between screaming expletives and name calling and actually saying, here are some things that I know I longed for from you and didn't feel like I had received or didn't receive in a way that it computed for me. There's a real difference. And so, I was actually driving to work this morning and thinking about some skills, lifelong skills that I hope our children are gaining. But one of those is the way that we try to, express discontent with each other in our house and the language we use around it and the ways that we try to model for our children, being able to come back and say, this is my experience of that thing, or this is how that impacted me, like really owning it as part of the storytelling versus projecting or youing or, anything along those lines.
That is the perfect segue into my next question that I have for Father. So, if we're looking at the other side of the storytelling process, the idea of receiving someone's story well, right? I think human nature means that, like you mentioned earlier, I think, Father, when someone shares from a deep place of vulnerability and honesty, human nature really does not require, but it leans us in the direction of responding with empathy and with acceptance. I think most of the time, we're able to see the hurt and we're able to respond with love and with charity and with receptivity there. There are certainly times where that wall can go up. And especially if it's someone that we're close with, someone that maybe part of their story has resulted in things that have hurt us, right? If I have a spouse that is doing things that are harmful to me and it's rooted in part of their story, if a sibling in my family has a story either connected to my family or not, that's resulted in a lot of upheaval in my family system, it might be really, really hard for me to hear them and respond with grace and with patience and mercy. So for someone receiving a story, receiving someone else, what thoughts or suggestions would you give them on how to respond in kind?
And you guys talk about it all the time, I'm sure, but the reality of when we can live an integrated life and we can live in kind of peace with ourselves and in this window of tolerance in the space where we're regulated, you're much likely to be able to create a safety around you and your heart where you can receive the stories of others. So that's why the work generally doesn't happen in the moment. You're like, I'm really good at doing this. The day-to-day experience of being able to live kind of an integrated life with my own heart, my own story, then allows me to be like, oh, wow, you just mentioned something that I remember from my past and what we'd say triggered, right? Sure. But it's okay. I can kind of stay in relationship with myself and the Lord and then be able to receive you, One of the things that I like words that I like to throw out there too, because again, I think particularly for men, but women can do it too, but we're just fixers. And so you share something with me and I'm like, well, let's fix it. Yeah. Let's do something about it. Let's be quick to speak. Let's be quick to get a plan, And one of the things I think is important is to validate. And so I feel it still feels awkward for me sometimes, but when someone shares something, just to be like, oh, brother, that just must have been so hard. Yeah. Validating, yeah, Father, I experienced this, I experienced it with their family. And just to be like, oh, it's I often say I feel that with you. Rather than be like, oh, great, bro, I'm so super grateful for you sharing that. And be like, well, what? No, and I think the challenge though too, is you're off the hook by, for men particularly, we were like, oh, Pat, it's so great that you experienced that, because my experience is that I had this in my story. Right. You're like, correct. Whoa, bro, who's talking? Whose story is this? whose story is
hijacked?
Just hijack storytelling. Yeah.
Right. And again, I see that even on that, I see that happening at a net table. You're like, oh wow, she's sharing something, and then everybody was like, oh yeah, my experience too. Rather than being like, that sounded awesome. Yeah. And say, you're in keeping the momentum with the other person, right? So it's subtle things sometimes, but I think we do that because we get nervous. Yeah.
I was just going to say, the tension.
It's the tension of it all. And it feels, but if you take the pressure off yourself, it's like, what if they just need a loving presence, a listening presence? You're like, oh, I just would really love to be with you in that, and I'm so grateful for you sharing that. And then if you, it's great, the skills that we learn, just hey, in spiritual direction, we have been a spiritual director in school as well. And they always say the classic spiritual direction, hey, you mentioned this. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Yeah. Yeah. Which is a classic, rather than you said this, okay, so I can fix you, and this is but tell me more. Do you mind sharing a little bit? You, and that's what the story is. I recently had a young man write a story, and the gift of writing it out is super important, because then you can go through it and you have different touch points or trailheads in the midst of the story, and so it's beautiful. Hey, bro, you mentioned this. Can you just take me back there for a second? What was that like, or what did that feel like? And you're like, oh, okay. So just like genuine interest, a genuine sense of, I hear you, I'm with you, rather than, and keeping it on them rather than like, okay, well, here's how I would say this needs to be redeemed. Like, whoa, redeeming is like being with you in it. So anyway, is that kind of a couple different things?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And that exact idea of allowing the difficulty of someone else's hardship and just being present with them in that. One of our episodes that we recorded, I can't remember which one now, we talked about the idea that so many times my inclination to fix something is what I might identify is that I want them to feel better. But the reality most of the time is that I want myself to feel better, because it's hard for me to watch someone else that I love suffering. Yep. So, yeah, sure. If they feel better, that's fine. But I just don't want to feel like this anymore.
I don't feel like this.
Yeah, exactly. And even if the problem doesn't go away, I feel better if I have tried to fix it somehow, right? Even the attempt is like therapeutic for me somehow. So just stepping out of myself for a moment and just acknowledging like, okay, this is not about me, just like the rest of my life, but this particular moment also not about me. What do they need? What they need is to continue being heard and received and accompanied through this.
Yeah.
And we're most likely able to do that. Okay, I can do that. I often feel like this is actually a lot simpler than we think.
Yeah.
Oh, I can be with you. I can look on you with tenderness and love right now. Okay.
Yeah.
It is simpler. And I think, especially in this world that we are living in this day and age, it's not easier because I think we are used to turning to a technology. We are used to turning to but what's the fix? What's the thing that's going to make this not hurt so much or not be such an obstacle for me or an impediment to that goal that I have in mind? And Father, you're really proposing to us like, how does healing actually happen? Healing doesn't happen through fixing it. Healing happens through this accompaniment.
And this relationship in this place. Yeah.
And totally. I think about Pat and I had the privilege of having John Cavadini at Notre Dame in the theology department. He was the chair of the department. And in our catechism class, he said, like, I don't have to save the world, but I have to be conformed to the love that already did. And so,
come on.
right? And so like you are saying to us, like, can you be Christ? Like, can you be just that willing heart and presence that bring your vulnerability? I think about even too, sometimes with clients, I'll say to them, like, that is so hard for me to hear that you went through that. Just being real with them. I think they think I'm a therapist. I've heard it all, which I mean, I have in some ways, but sometimes just being honest and being like, my heart is breaking for you as
and
you
there's
share
tears
that.
that come to their eyes when you say something like that. They're like, it's like a shock. They're like, oh my gosh, like someone's actually like breaking through my self-protection and receiving me. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
Like the feeling of being seen and understood and known in a way that maybe you've never been received like that before. Like that, like you said, it's not some revolutionary, crazy new skill that humanity has just now discovered. In a lot of ways, it's just returning to what it means like to be in genuine face-to-face reality and relationship, like recovering some of those abilities.
And I wonder if you guys see this, and I think this is what you're getting at, but when you start to do that and their story starts to open up, we're Christ to them, but then that's the whole image and likeness thing. You start to see like glimmers through the darkness, through the struggle, through the pain of like who they are in the Lord. You're like, oh my gosh, like there's light coming through now. And you start to see Jesus. And I think that's the gift of like this relationship we have as Christians, moms and dads and moms and kids, and then priests and people, like whatever it might be. But you start to recognize this two-way street, and you're like, and that's where like you can be done at the end of the day, going through things and doing things. And you're like, I sit before the Lord. I'm just like, Lord, that was powerful because you were there. And not only in me, hopefully, but in the other person. Yeah. It's really beautiful.
I think of the ways that relates to like the work of the missionaries of charity or your work with the poor, folks in Harlem and the Bronx, of the poor and the vulnerable. And we were just in the Bronx this past summer, and just a reminder of like the rawness of the east side of like the South Bronx and certain places in the world, and like somebody laying without a home on the street for days at a time. Like Mother Teresa would have said, Jesus present in the distressing disguise of the poor, right? That on the outside, what we see with our eyes is this rough, tough exterior, but in there are those glimmers that you're talking about, that the dignity, the presence of Christ is there, that they have a story, and that for whatever reason, the story has led them to this place with me standing right in front of them. Yeah. So what's my response to that moment? Yeah. And, all of us probably have encounters with people living in material poverty at some point. We ought to, at least as Christians, as Catholics, but all of us have experiences of that at minimum on a spiritual level.
Yeah,
that
totally.
with the people that we love in our own homes, the people that we work with, our friends, our neighbors, people who their circumstances, their story has put them right in front of us. So how can I see Jesus present to them in whatever the distressing disguise is? Yeah.
There's a friend of mine who buys a pizza every once in a while and will go downtown where he lives and just sit with one of the people on the street and have pizza and say, "Hey, what's your story?"
Oh my gosh.
In this vein of, and we teach our guys as well, like the gift of our relational ministry is that we are not going to solve poverty. We are not going to, a lot of our neighbors are mentally ill. A lot of our neighbors are addicted. They don't leave us without like the addiction healed.
Yeah.
They don't leave us with their depression healed. But do they give us more access to their hearts? Do they give us more access to their stories? You're like, okay, that's how Jesus loved. Mm-hmm. So, and again, I love you're like, okay, whether it's the guy on the street or whether it's my son or whether it's my brother or whether it's a net missionary, whatever it might be, like if we can live in that way, that I'm generally interested in you. I just think it's beautiful because that's like healing at its core.
Yeah.
We start to do that if we start to live in a space with each other in that way. It's really,
and that's so motivating to me too. Like, okay, so you're telling me I don't have to solve poverty? I have to love the person who's in front of me. Okay, like I can do that. Like I forget that other thing. I can't do that, but I can do this particular kind of love that the Lord has already called me to.
You guys are probably not understand like those in ministry. Like I'll clump all the ministries together, like Focus, Life Team, Net, Damascus, all these amazing missionaries.
Yeah.
They kind of look at us like, hey, what's your kind of like grand plan for evangelization? We're like, there's no plan, bro. Some of them are busy business savvy and we're going to fundraise and we're going to do this. I'm like, plan? You guys look at us. There's no plan. It's the door. That's the plan. So it's really.
Well, what's your one sheet project, Father?
You're like, plan? I don't have a plan. I'm going to show up for prayer, go to breakfast with the guys, and then make phone calls. You know what I mean? That's the plan. But it's this like, okay, what's in front of me?
Yeah.
And so like you people who come to you, like they like moment at moment, like an opportunity, like this is my day we just spent with you. Great. Okay. This is the plan. Mm-hmm. Again, I love taking pressure off people. You're like, you don't actually have to like solve everything today.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Well,
are we done? Are we done? Oh, it went too quick. It went too quick.
Well, I think when you said every time I come to Minnesota, we were like, okay.
Yeah,
this doesn't have to be a 4-hour. This doesn't have to be a 4-hour marathon. Then.
And we will give you a barely tasteable sparkling water every time. It'll be great. You'll love it. Yeah.
I failed.
Father, what a gift. So you mentioned this a little bit earlier on, but in terms of something practical that we could challenge our listeners with, of a way to start living this out more practically in their lives, what's a challenge by choice you would offer folks?
Yeah, I think maybe there's a couple, like we'll put those couple together to start praying for that the Lord would send me someone to receive my story. That could be formal, like I need to go to therapy, or that could be informal, that a friend came into my life and really with the eyes of Jesus. And also I would say for the grace to have Jesus show me a part of my story that I need to accept and grieve. And again, that's a space where I can, with someone else, just feel and experience my life. And again, there's part of me is like tempted to be like, okay, and then you do this, and then to accept my story and to grieve.
Yeah,
what happened to me and with someone else, and that will open up. And again, I'll add to that like this space of having compassion on myself and my story as well. So hopefully that's clear. So
yes, and we will clarify it in the show notes too. So Father, as we round out this episode, would you mind closing us in prayer?
I would love to. And in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Amen. Just through the intercession of our Blessed Mother, through her spouse, Saint Joseph, to all of our patron saints, we just really dwell in the gift of the presence of God in this very moment, who's alive in our hearts. We would pray for the gift of peace, to know that our story matters. And our story was meant for glory and the revelation of God in Jesus. And that, Lord, you give us everything we need and everyone we need to remove every obstacle that is in the way of a deeper communion and integration we have with ourselves, so we can love you in the world and share you with others. give us joy, give us peace, give us confidence in you, Lord, and bless this beautiful couple and their family. Bless all those who listen. May we experience the gift of your presence this day. And I bless all of you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 Awesome. Well, thank you again,
Such a
Father
gift.
Angelus.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for being with us for another awesome episode. Check us out on social media, This Whole Life Podcast. Would you please consider who's one person, maybe the person you're going to invite to share stories with? Who's one person that you could share this episode with? Let's spread the word. Let's spread this goodness. And until next time, God bless you.
You're not alone.
This Whole Life is a production of the Martin Center for Integration. Visit us online at thiswholelifepodcast.com.
My brother-in-law talks about LaCroix is that you get dirty dishwater and you throw a fruit basket past it. You're like, all right.